Unit 8, Lesson 3, Social Privilege. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Conflict Resolution and Peacemaking, the class that teaches you how to manage interpersonal conflict and drama for yourself and others. I'm your instructor, David Lowry. Long ago, I lived in my hometown of Abilene, Texas. This was long before social media, smartphones, and the internet. The only press of its time was the local newspaper, radio stations, and 2 television stations. As luck would have it, while I was in high school, I obtained a job as a country western disc jockey on a popular radio station. Before long, my popularity began to rise, and I was asked to speak at charity and fundraising events. I hosted a big local talent show, and I was even asked to do a stand-up comedy routine as a headliner for a famous country western performer passing through town. When I met someone for the first time, I was often asked, "Hey, are you that guy I listen to every day on the radio?" I was a mini celebrity in Abilene, Texas. I enjoyed my newfound popularity and social status, but honestly, I did nothing to earn all the attention I was getting besides entertaining people with music they liked to hear. Everyone who worked to be a good employee and earn a living was just as deserving of attention as I was. The only difference was I had a more public and favored job. Social scientists call this social privilege. Social privilege is another aspect of power that most people don't think about very often. They believe privilege is reserved for the rich and famous, but it can be more subtle than that. Black defines privilege as a preferred status ascribed to one's personal characteristics, such as race, gender, sexual orientation, not readily changed. We live in a world divided by race, color, creed, sexual orientation, religion, body type, and able-bodiedness, to name but a few. And for each demographic mentioned, some groups enjoy more status and receive more opportunities than others. When you are in a favored group, you may never have stopped to consider that some who are not in these favored groups suffer daily from microaggressions, social exclusion, social divisions, social problems, discrimination, disadvantage, powerlessness, exploitation, and oppression. And this is from Pease in 2010. Privilege also involves intersectionality. We can think of this as the synergistic effect that occurs when one belongs to many privileged groups. For instance, I am a white man living in America with an advanced degree, making reasonably good income, while doing a job that many would consider as having respect or status. The intersectionality of all these elements affords me far more opportunities in our society than other men and women. Yet, men like me will often not acknowledge nor understand the power and advantages we have by having all of these things. You see, privilege isn't always easy to recognize. It's easy to be blind to our privilege. Last night, I saw a letter written by the manager of a nationally recognized hedge fund that was addressed to the chief executive officer of Google. In the letter, the fund manager explicitly tells Google that it should fire thousands of workers to improve the value of its stock. The letter explained that the hedge fund also believes Google pays specific categories of tech workers far too much money and that this practice should end. The letter concluded with the fund manager stating that he would be willing to discuss these matters further. The privilege embedded in this letter was astounding. It was written by a man who makes multiple millions of dollars in salary and benefits every year, far beyond what even wealthy individuals make, who was blind to his privilege. His demands that Google fire people and reduce wages to improve the hedge fund's position is perhaps one of the most selfish and insensitive demands one could make, given that Google is presently one of the wealthiest technological companies in the world. Yet this man has no compunction about making even more wealth by taking away people's livelihoods. This is the world of privilege we live in. Most people don't recognize their privilege. While many Americans may not view themselves as privileged because of their economic or social status, the advantage of being in the majority racial group is real. The National Association of School Psychologists offers the following explanation of privilege. Unearned advantages are those someone receives by being born into a specific group. It's important to note that these groups who have received these advantages have not earned them due to hard work, but rather their affiliation, such as being born into a wealthy family. It provides privileges others do not have, such as accessing education, as well as mental health and medical services. White Americans are more likely to walk into a mall without the suspicion of stealing. Equally important to note is the reality that while some benefit from unearned advantages, others are victim of unearned disadvantages. Unearned entitlements are things of value that all people should have. However, they are often restricted to particular groups because of the value of the majority culture that influence political and social decisions. The National Conference for Community and Justice lists 10 forms of social privilege, but will only provide a few: Christian privilege, class privilege, heterosexual straight privilege, male privilege, white privilege, and adult privilege. As mentioned earlier, for many, privilege is the least recognized form of power, unless, of course, one belongs to an oppressed group. Then it becomes immediately apparent. As Lou Pickett and Ivy wrote, we believe that privilege arises from situations and environments wherein one's social identities, such as race, social class, religious affiliations, are considered normative and therefore not questioned by peers, family, or society. Over time, the individual's isolated worldview is assumed by the individual to be normative, universal, and those not subscribing to the privileged person's worldview are considered deviant. What does privilege look like? Black further defines 5 aspects of privilege. Privilege is a special advantage that is neither common nor universal. Privilege is granted, not earned, or brought into being by one's individual effort or talents. Privilege is a right or entitlement related to a preferred status or rank. Privilege is exercised for the recipient's benefit and to the exclusion or detriment of others. And lastly, privilege is often outside the awareness of the person possessing it. In 2007, social science researchers created a personal measure of privilege known as the Social Privilege Measure. They found that privilege has 5 distinct dimensions. They are personal credibility. This describes one's personal legitimacy when investigated by others. Questions that this measure uses include, if a traffic cop pulls me over, I can be certain that I have not been singled out because of my race. Or, I can take a job with an affirmative action employer without having my coworkers suspect that I got the job because of my race. Visibility. This describes how positively one's culture is represented or presented in the culture around them. Questions that measure this include, when I turn on the television or look on the front page of the newspaper, I see people of my race widely represented. In almost any drugstore, I can expect to find hair care products suitable for my needs. Penalty. This dimension measures the degree to which people perceive they will be mistreated due to their race. Questions that measure this dimension include, I can go shopping in almost any store without being harassed by store detectives. Persons of my race are often viewed as perpetrators of crime. Environmental predictability. This dimension measures how safe and confident one can feel in their environment. Questions that measure this dimension include, I can be pretty sure that my child's teacher will accept them if they comply with the school's expectations. And I can expect my new neighborhood to be pleasant or neutral to me. Protection. This measures the degree that one perceives they can protect others from the harm of privilege and oppression. Questions that measure this dimension include: I do not have to warn my children to be aware of racism for their physical protection. Teacher acceptance of my child is not or will not be dependent on the teacher's attitudes towards the race of my child. According to Wildman, the harm of privilege is that it strengthens the power it creates and maintains. The invisible cannot be combated, and as a result, privilege is allowed to perpetuate, regenerate, and recreate itself. Privilege is systematic, not an occasional occurrence. Privilege is invisible, and silence sustains its invisibility in the face of privilege. Peacemakers and Privilege. From a peacemaking point of view, unrecognized privilege can be a form of harm and oppression embedded in conflict and drama. Then, too, peacemakers are not immune from social privilege. This does not mean that people should apologize or feel guilty about the advantages they enjoy based on privilege. However, we are saying that peacemakers need to be perceptive that privilege is more than a theoretical social construct and that it impacts some people's lived experiences. Since privilege can be used positively or negatively, we are saying that privilege should never be exploited or used as a way of disadvantaging another intentionally. We need to recognize that privilege exists. Peacemakers should also be aware that social privilege can be a particularly harmful element in interpersonal conflict and drama. When people who belong to a favored social class use their power unfairly, conflicts inevitably result. For instance, a dispute that I mediated one time involved a wealthy builder who was displeased with some work that was done. Rather than work with the craftsman, he decided to avoid paying the man. While it is true that the builder deserves quality work, his privilege should not dictate that he and he alone be the only one to decide what should be done about his concern. Don't dismiss the experience of others. When peacemakers hear others complaining about sexism, racism, homophobia, and the like, they should avoid a quick conclusion that these people are overreacting. Further, they should not be quick to overestimate social progress in these areas. Our culture still needs to work to be fairer and more equitable. Imagine a doctor who accuses patients of hypochondria because they cannot find an apparent cause for their patient's pain and suffering. This actually happened to my wife one time. Several years later, we found the exact cause of the pain. Privilege can be just like that. Because something may not be in our personal experience does not mean that others do not experience it daily. Help whenever you can. Peacemakers should reflect on our potential advantages and be willing to offer help as much as we can. We don't want to be blind to the shared experiences of others. If we are willing to think about our privilege and advantages, we can work to help enact social change so others can have them as well. And we can do this in small ways. Here's an example. A friend of mine was outside Starbucks on a cold day and noticed a person sitting outside shivering. This person was wearing a nice jacket, so he took it off, gave it to the man, and then asked him what he wanted to drink. While the man wasn't wealthy, he knew he could buy another jacket later in the day. This is an example of using privilege to help someone. Another person I know bought Christmas presents for a struggling family. The point is, peacemakers can learn to use their privilege positively to help others rather than assuming that everyone has the same opportunities that we do. Another thing we can do is exercise sensitivity when we find ourselves in discussions of social issues. It's easy to make statements and draw conclusions influenced by privilege. We should not assume that another person could replicate our experiences if they were more motivated, worked harder, or were willing to do as we have done. Remain humble and work for equality. In a perfect world, there would be no inequities due to race, color, creed, economic power, gender, and the like. But this is not the world we presently live in. Our best hope at this time is for peacemakers to develop the qualities of reflection, humility, and a willingness to admit that so many of us are the recipients of benefits we have not fully earned. At the same time, we can commit ourselves to lives of helpfulness and increase our willingness to tirelessly work towards a more humane and respectful world of equality. Today, we have discussed a unique form that is often overlooked, and that is social privilege. We said that social privilege bestows advantages on people because they belong to a favored group, while others who don't belong face disadvantages and at times discrimination. Peacemakers should pay attention to privilege because it can be embedded in many conflicts and interpersonal dramas. Thank you for joining us today. We encourage you to download a copy of this transcript and use it to answer questions about the lesson.